Can we move forward and see the new options that we have instead of just dealing on buckets and money moving back and forth?
I would like to close and say that I think it's important that we understand that what this plan appears to be doing is we've got almost $3 million of additional costs that we're not foreseeing or we're not in the known
It's just
or whatever.
a reality.
A reality. So we're taking them disproportionately out of the aquatics, in my opinion. And I think we need to. That's something that the community needs to have an input.
Right. I think I see what you're saying. I don't know that that's necessarily the opinion that everybody has up here, but again, staff has a pretty difficult job because we limited. I mean, actually the solution to that is to spend more money, which is what we are not going to allow them to do. So we can't ask them to build a building for it's going to cost more than what we have to spend, unless we give them the authority to spend more money, or we just tell them, okay, we're going to move all this stuff outside. What are we going to give up? And again, what good is an indoor pool that doesn't have anything in it? And what good is an outdoor pool in the wintertime when we can't open it up for the weather? It's a give or take, and that's kind of where they're at. That's why they get these people to try to get the most for what they can with the money and the area that they have. Let's go ahead and move forward.
So again, this is the site map, just to reorient everyone. This is Hobby Lobby here to the north, IKEA Way, and Slater on the east. And I am actually going to invite Rick Wise, our architect, up to run through again the interior of the building, just so we can consider the entire program as we move forward in the conversation. And I know you all have seen this before, so you all.
Sure. Yep. Rick Wise, Clark Emerson Partners. What do you need my address?
Professional address as
I'll just go with my personal address. 15412 West 91st Terrace. So, just to give you an overview of the building that's been planned today, I know all of you have seen it. Essentially, the layout of the building is in this U shape, which we've presented before. It has this interior courtyard, really trying to capitalize on creating a community space as you enter the building, and really having that community space, that courtyard element, be another place within the building, so that if you want to have outdoor events, you can do that. It's really an inward focused building, and that was really part of the design concept. The building has two levels. The first level, as you enter, would be where you're going to have your entry vestibule, reception desk for checking in. It's going to be the community rooms, group exercise, fitness space. Lower level would be the gymnasium, locker rooms, indoor aquatics, and then access point to the outdoor aquatic space. View from the southwest, as you can see, and you probably know on this site, a lot of the view of this building is going to be, you're going to see a lot of roof. The parking garage, its placement will actually help to screen the building a little bit, and what you'll see of the roof. But we've been very conscious about how we plan the design of the roof so that it is an amenity for the building and not an eyesore. A view from the northwest, here you start to see this two-story component. The building does step down the site as you approach from the north, or from the south, and move toward the north. This side on the right is the space adjacent to the outdoor aquatics, and the inside is the indoor aquatics and locker rooms. This would be the northeast corner of the building, and the area on the left is where the office space would be, as well as the community rooms. You can see that even though this doesn't have the site shown around the building, grade is stepping down as you move to the north along Slater. The floor plans for the building, this is the main level as you enter. You enter a main vestibule, you're first greeted by staff, and then you have a choice of going left and right. You go to the right, you go to the office space for the facility, as well as the community room. So we have three large community rooms that can be subdivided as individual rooms, or they can be opened up as one large community space. We do have a catering kitchen in the south east corner of the building, and then along the courtyard side is where we have gallery space, really to replicate some of the gallery space that we currently have in the French Center. To the left, as you enter, you'll start to see glimpses of the gymnasium, the walking track, and then takes you around to the fitness area in the northwest corner, group exercise, and then another classroom that's really dedicated for fitness. Going down the main stair, you'll have access directly into a lounge area, and then to the north is the gymnasium. The gymnasium accommodates volleyball, basketball, pickleball, kind of type uses, with direct access into the locker room that is in the northwest corner of the building. And then the indoor aquatic space is in the southwest corner. Entry and access to indoor aquatics, you're either going through the family change area that is directly to the right or to the east of the indoor aquatic space, or through the locker rooms. Really trying to control access to the indoor aquatic space as well as to the outdoor aquatic space. Just a few images just to give you a sense of the overall design as it's developing. Obviously, we're still in the design phase. These images do not have color because color is still being developed, and we don't want to show something that might catch you off guard. We'd rather have it black and white just to get a sense of you like the space or not. This first image is the view from the adjacent to the group exercise space, looking down to the indoor aquatics area. This is another view of the inside of the indoor aquatic space. Assuming you could actually, you're probably about 20 feet tall at this point, so none of us will ever see this, but it does give a good overview. You can see that we do have lap lanes on the south side, two slide elements, lazy river, and then in at the end of the pool area is a therapy pool, and then access back to the locker rooms, family change, and lifeguard area. This is from the deck elevation. Again, what you might see, likely the structure will actually be the structural joists. We're not going to put in a drywall ceiling in there, so it won't be flat like this. But it does give you a sense of the volume. It is a two-story space. Do have some windows out onto the pool deck. And then again, you can see the slide elements. A lifeguard area, this is basically the lifeguard office. This is where they're taking care of people that need some assistance. There's a separate locker area and a small restroom. We have two pool party rooms at the lower level, directly adjacent to the indoor aquatic space. These will be outfitted with minor amenities, sink, and then there's a separate pool storage or pool party storage room for a refrigerator, and so if you want to bring in a cake or things like that. But we think these would be highly used. Locker area, we have both locker areas that are for family use as well as lockers that are for general use, men's and women's. Upstairs, we do have this fit bar, which we mentioned last time. Again, it's a place where people can congregate and then talk about their fitness plan. That's really that entrance point into both the walking track and to the fitness areas. So it becomes a good hub to bring people together. This is a view if you're looking down the gym from the track. Again, we have a track around the upper level perimeter of the gymnasium. The front lobby reception area, again, a reception desk for greeting people coming to the facility, ADA accessible, but really good sight lines and control of people coming into the building so that they're making sure to greet everybody as they enter. As I mentioned, we do have gallery space. This is looking to the south in the gallery area on the community wing. We're capitalizing on the corridor space to use it more than just circulation, but a chance to have some art within that area. And then on the far south end, we do have more of an enclosed space that would be available for art installations as well. Community room, again, we have 3 subdividable rooms, or 1 large room subdividable into 3. This shows what it looks like if there's 1 room, and then this image showing that if you were to open that up, it would be a much larger space for different types of larger events. We do have a child watch area. If you're a parent coming to the facility, this would be an opportunity for you to drop off your child while you're either working out or going to one of the community rooms. And then again, office area. The staff, the building is in the north east corner of the facility on the upper level. So we have several offices, a small conference room, and then the work room, which is this. Any questions about the building before I proceed on? Yes, sir.
Could you go back to the interior pool 1 slide, and might be easier to ask the questions on that, and some of these I know we've asked before, but I didn't have answers, I hope you have them tonight.
Sure.
What is the deck load, the occupant deck load around the interior pool?
So we will get more into occupant load later. We just haven't set the exact dimensions of this space yet because we're still in conceptual design. So I can't give you a number until I fully understand what's going inside and what's going outside.
Well, that concerns me because we're building a facility and part of it hinges on how many people can we put in this interior space, how many people can we put outside, how many people can sit around this deck. I think those are all answers we've got to have.
They absolutely are. We can talk about water. We are prepared to fully discuss water space, bather load, and occupancy load this evening. So it kind of depends on if you choose to keep everything inside, how much deck space we have outside is impacted by the amenities that you put out there. I can tell you there are conversations we're having amongst our team right now. I just want to make sure that we put out the correct information. And we need a little more time to do that because we have to understand where the building is going and what's happening indoor and outdoor. So not avoiding your question, I'm happy to provide it as soon as we have that information. We're just not quite there in
Are
design
you going to be
yet.
asking us to vote on this evening though?
Outdoor. I'm talking about outdoor aquatics. And I think it's important to remember that even though we're showing pictures that look fairly far developed, we're just really 1 step beyond boxes on a piece of paper. We had to get something put together, which is what started this conversation. So there are a lot of details that we have to finalize, but we don't finalize our design for the building until the end of this year. So we're looking for feedback on concepts to move forward with.
And then, Mr. Schrinkel, just to clarify this, tonight, what we're going to be speaking about is the outdoor aquatic layout and the proposed site plan for the new community center. And the purpose for needing to have this discussed is because it has to go to the planning commission so they can take their next plan. So we're not here to iron out every individual detail because it hasn't been determined. Is that correct?
That is correct.
That is correct. Yeah, and we do come back to the city council in September for a more detailed presentation about the interior. The only reason we're showing the interior right now, it hasn't even been to the design committee, is because we think it's important you understand what else we're proposing for the inside of the building so we can look at this as a full community center and not just an aquatic space.
We're being asked to make a decision on the outdoor aquatics, but yet we've also been told repeatedly that the reason that it's all smaller is because we've got a combined indoor-outdoor space. So it would seem illogical for me to be asking to make a decision about a piece of something that is a dynamic, symbiont kind of.
But that's why we're showing the inside.
Well, I understand that, but that's, I guess, to me, if we don't fully understand the indoor aquatics piece,
See, I think, and I understand there's a confusion here. But the reason why we are at this point tonight to discuss pool has to do with proposed site plan. We won't know what the proposed site plan, which is like the footprint of the building and the site, until we can figure out how big the outdoor pool is. We already know how big the indoor pool is, and we may not know what's going to be in the indoor pool yet, but we know how big it is. What we need to do now is try to figure out how big the outdoor pool will be, so that if you're flying a drone over the top of it, you can say, here's the shape of it, and that's what the planning commission needs. That's why we're here tonight. How big is the outdoor pool going to be, and how does that impact how the site plan is going to look? And that's where our conversation needs to be restricted. Whether we talk about what's going to be inside or outside, it's important because it can change the shape and the size of the outdoor pool.
Yeah, having an understanding of what amenities you want inside and what amenities you want outside allows us to move to the next phase in the design process. And the issue so far is that we've gotten a lot of conflicting opinions about what should be inside and what should be outside. So our goal tonight is to understand what amenities you want inside and what amenities you want outside, and we are prepared to talk about how much the water holds tonight. Once we understand what the water holds, then we can come back and say, here's what the deck space holds. We do understand that there are minimum requirements we have to meet for deck space. There has to be some room in there for people to sit, and a lot of those are governed by code. We're certainly going to try to maximize that, but we really need to get a handle on what the amenities are so we can move to the next phase in the design process.
One more comment, please. I understand the need to finalize a site plan, but, and the reason for that need is so that we meet some deadlines that we've set as aspirational goals to have the pool open for Memorial Day 2020, even though that's not part of the formal schedule. I think that understanding fully how the design of the indoor and the outdoor fits together is really important. And if we may need to take the time to get it right rather than just rush something through because we're under this site plan. Now, other people may think differently, but I think it's really important that because we're going to live with this for 30 years. And so if we don't get it right, the inside aquatics and the outside aquatics, they're supposed to work together. If we can't get our minds around and understand what we're actually looking at, it's difficult and probably risky to make a decision.
And again, I say, let's see what you guys have done. Let's see the options you've
Yeah,
put
pretty
together.
long. I just, because I know there was some confusion on the outside, it's true about the inside now too. Is that 25 yards or 25 meters inside?
Everything is yards. We have discovered over the course of the day that although our designers have always been designing us to the national standard of yards, we have been using the terms interchangeably, much like many of our neighboring cities who report they have a 25-meter pool and they have a 25-yard pool. So we've spent the day confirming 25-yard is the standard for a short course lap lane pool. And I will mention that Justin is with us tonight from Aquatic Design Group, and so he is our aquatics expert who is happy to answer more detailed questions once we get into that conversation. But it is 25 yards. All right. So this area outlined on the pink is the area where our aquatics programming is happening on the site. Like we talked about before, we both have indoor and outdoor aquatics. And Councilmember Neal, as you had asked the last time I was up here, in the master plan, the total square foot of aquatic space, water space, and deck space that we had considered as part of the master plan was 13,777. 13,777 is what was outlined as part of the master plan. All right, and so we have gone over the indoor pool, but I'll just cover the proposed amenities one more time. Down here at the bottom, we have 4 lanes, 25 yards. We have a large slide. We have a small family slide. We have a zero depth entry area here that will have some splash and spray features for younger children. We have a therapy pool that is a warmer temperature that we can do swim lessons and therapy and provide some individual space in this area for smaller groups. And then we do have a lazy river, and this is an open area for swim and play. Like I mentioned in the last meetings, there will be hooks installed along this pool that won't interfere with lap swimming, but they will allow us to add some temporary amenities into that space, like basketball goals and volleyball nets. Log rolling, all sorts of things that are really popular right now. All right, so these are the initial layouts that we presented on July 9th. And so these are within budget. So this was our initial, you can see indoor space and outdoor space. I will note that one of the things we had talked about from the beginning, because we had come into this conversation just trying to get concepts and amenities identified, is there's probably a need for either of these first options to move a little more in alignment with the indoor aquatics area to create some more cohesiveness between those two spaces. But this is just initially to see some things spatially, what we put on the piece of paper. So this is an 8-lane, 25-yard pool. These are 7-foot lanes versus 8-foot lanes, which are sometimes used. We do have 2 1-meter diving boards, and this is just a 0-depth entry ramp. And in these next 2 features, we have budget for some play features that are not yet shown on these because we need to do some additional design development. So some spray features in the 0-depth area, and we had talked about the option of adding a drop slide, but wanted to confirm what the base amenity was from the beginning. Option 2, and this is a 6-lane, 25-yard pool. Again, we have our 2 diving boards included here. It has an expanded 0-depth area where we would include some additional splash features, and this layout does provide us with some additional deck space as well. So before I move into our next 4 layouts that we have for consideration, I'm going to turn it over to Chris and Cindy to talk about how we are proposing handling funding for additional features.
So it was, as it was mentioned, the first 2 options that were presented were within the $30 million budget. Those where we can absorb and deliver on those without asking for any additional funding or any sort of changing of priorities within the existing facility. The next 4 options that we're going to present all have a price tag to them. And we need to understand that there's going to be something that moves around, which will have a rippling effect because we are going to do less of something, or we're going to have to move something around. We come up with money within the budget, or we have to come up with money outside the budget. Well, we're not prepared to have a detailed conversation about money that's available outside of the $30 million budget. As was previously mentioned earlier this evening by Mr. Neal, there is a TIF that is next door to this particular facility. There are development costs that are in the community center budget that really were designed to support the parking structure that were not initially put into the TIF estimate that we could include as TIF eligible expenses. Those are about $1 million. So we can come up with about $1 million extra to pay for things that are directly tied to the parking structure and would be allowable expenses. So we could, by having that extra $1 million out of the TIF, we would have $1 million extra that would be allowable for other things within the facility. So that one we think we can come up with. We can come up with $1 million. Past that $1 million, there aren't any other eligible TIF expenses, as we've seen them, at least as our bond counsel has shared with us, that look like they're allowable. One of the other questions was about unallocated CIP. We had to wait. Finance director was on vacation for the last week and a half, but when she got back in the office this morning, sorry, over there, she's right here. There are in the 5-year CIP, there are unallocated funds in this year. There is not in the 5-year plan, which is how we plan the CIP. There's really not a whole lot of money in there. At the end of the 5-year plan, assuming that the 5-year plan is pretty accurate, we will have less than $200,000 in the CIP. So that's if we were to come up with another $1 million. I'm sorry, I've got to clarify that. So if we go to the CIP to come up with anything above the $1 million that we can find to fund this, we really think we need to have some policy conversations about what are we not going to do. Now, those things can be in the CIP. They can be projects that are budgeted in the 5-year CIP, whether those are sidewalk programs or they're street programs. Because there is a transfer to the CIP from the general fund, we can have conversations about the general fund in terms of public safety, public works, admin. There's costs that we have in the general fund, the policies, decisions that have been made that we can go back and have a conversation so that we eliminate those, so there's more money that we can transfer to the CIP. But there's just not money sitting in the CIP to the tune of $1 million to come up with $1 million. That's just the reality of it. Well, we have diminished CIP needs, as was mentioned many, many times as we talked about the sales tax initiative. The reason we talked about the diminished CIP needs in this kind of era that we're in was so that we could afford the 10-year note as opposed to the 20 years. So what we are paying out of CIP is increased debt service. We pay debt service on a 10-year note versus a 20-year note. The decreased needs in the CIP is what allows us to do that. So while we're not paying for infrastructure out of CIP, we are paying for debt service. So that's the ongoing expenditure that's occurring in that CIP account. But once again, we can have a conversation. We would just need some direction. Staff didn't feel comfortable saying we're going to stop doing sidewalks or decrease small drainage or anything that's in the CIP. But we can come up with $1 million for TIF reimbursable expenses that we could reallocate to the building, to aquatics or anything else the council wants us to do. Anything above that, we'll have to go sharpen our pencils and come back with some sort of options on what everybody thinks would be an allowable cut or redistribution of existing funds, if that makes sense.
I'm going to go back to the TIF, and if we were to, granted, slow things down and establish another TIF project area, that would include the community center site and would pay for the $2.5 million excavation costs and a 200 and some odd thousand demolition costs, which I think are permissible under TIF in general. That gets us, we would be allowed to use more money out of the TIF fund, recognizing there's only $8 million. And if we spend $5 million on the parking garage, that leaves us $3 million, which seems like what we need, because basically it looks to me like the project is underfunded by $3 million. It has nothing to do with adding amenities to the aquatics. It's just core community center costs that weren't anticipated. The inflation between the 2018 dollars and the 2019 construction dollars of $2 million and the increased excavation costs of about $900,000. So that, it seems to me that that pot should be looked at also as a source to fix this problem, because I believe we have a problem. I believe we have promised, and it's in the plan, more aquatics, both outdoor and indoor, than what we're showing in the current project budget that has been determined by the team that Meredith was discussing. And I think we need to have a discussion about that. Why couldn't we do that other than the schedule?
There's nothing that says we couldn't do that. There's going to be certainly just allowable expenses that you can do there, although we had a conversation about, there was a discussion, should we put the facility in the TIF? And we determined that really didn't seem to be the right thing to do. You build a community center with TIF. The garage is truly infrastructure. So we would need to make sure, I'm just thinking out loud, we would need to make sure that we were very clear to the public what we were and we were not, because the TIF will now be part of, when you look at the TIF map, you will have a community center right in the middle of it.
Right, well, that's
So you will be tipping the community center.
That's one thing, but at the same time, we also didn't know when we were making those decisions that we were essentially almost $3 million over.
So the entire site, except for the community center, except for the footprint where the community center and pool are, is already in the TIF district. The only way we could expand the TIF area is if we somehow include the building and the pool in the TIF, which it has been, it's not allowable.
What is the site work underneath?
That's what I'm saying.
Is the site work underneath the building?
We don't need it to support the rest of the site, so the direction.
But I think, thinking out loud.
We have
But
to
I think you
confirm,
could
yeah.
I think you could create another TIF.
Project,
We
right.
could invest in another TIF project.
Correct. Not a TIF district, a project.
Another TIF project.
Just, let me,
That would delay all,
Yes.
it would pause us for several months.
Right,
to do
a
all.
couple of things. First of all, yes, the site work
dirt excavation, things like that is allowable for TIF. You'd have to either expand the current project plan that we just did, or make a new project plan. I also would be remiss to say that the TIF district also is an economic development tool that we have. And we need to be mindful that it is things we've used in the past, quite successfully, to help generate revenue for the city, help generate positive economic development. Examples being Marion Town Center, Marion Village, Marion Point. Those are areas that we have used money from the TIF district to incentivize and to improve the economic development. So just want to be mindful of that as you're having this discussion, that has been a tool that we've used very positively in the past for economic development.
Yeah. I understand that, and I know it's a useful tool. However, what better use of the money than something that is an asset for the entire community rather than funding the developer?
What was just shared with me is that $2 million for site work, or the $3 million for the total, most of that is already what we're scraping into the TIF anyway. So there's not that much money outside of what we're already going to use for allowable TIF expenses.
But you just said you can get $1 million.
And that's eating up some of that additional site work that was not originally projected. So the increases in the site cost, that's some of what we're pulling into the TIF as allowable expenses.
Well, what I'm asking is not just pulling in the increase, but I'm talking about pulling in the entire $2.5 million.
Well, most of that 2.5 is already in what currently would be $6 million.
Maybe it would be helpful to look at the site map. So right now, the TIF includes everything from this line right here, south.
Sorry, I can't.
I'm sorry, I was on the wrong side. This line from the southern facade of the building, south, is everything in the TIF. And the pool area, like Chris mentioned earlier, is already basically excavated. And this, because it is a one-story portion of the building, is mainly at grade. We're using the slope of the site for our split-story building. And so the majority of the grading and excavation costs are happening elsewhere on the site. There isn't $3 million more we could capture in reimbursable expenditures, or even much more than what we've already captured underneath of this building.
Where is that original 1.6 million for excavation and the additional, and the cost for demolition? Where was that in the 30 million, or is that actually,
So
we didn't have a TIF before
the
this?
demolition cost is part of this portion of the building, so it's not in TIF. We've captured as much of the site work as we can already in the 5 million, and then maximize that by taking the TIF potentially to 6 million. So we don't have, I mean, really what's happening here, the majority of this is just building construction costs, many of which are not TIF reimbursable expenses.
So the 5 million that we were talking about for the parking garage included a lot of the site work
It
already?
included some of the site work underneath the parking garage and the roadways to get to it. I mean, we tried to capture from the beginning as much in the 5 million as we could to free up.
The garage does not cost $5 million.
Okay. That's good.
Yeah.
Well, if you include all the excavation,
Excavation,
There will
the
be
road network.
costs to exceed $5 million.
Right, but what I'm trying to, I guess what I'm trying to understand is the email where you were talking about that the coring is revealing that the rock is closer to the surface, and we're going to have an increase of approximately $1 million in the excavation cost. I did not understand that the excavation costs that we have in the master plan that were already envisioned, that were part of the 30 million, had already been sort of moved off into the parking garage, because I wasn't aware of that. No one had shared that with me. So
Now everybody is.
And Mr. Mayor, I would just say that I would never vote for totally depleting the TIF balance, ever. So thinking that we're all on that same page is probably not accurate.
Well, it doesn't sound like it's relevant anyway, because there's not enough of the expenses that we could recover.
We've absorbed about the majority of the site costs that we can tie to that TIF.
And that-
Created a new TIF.
And that's what
There
you were
wouldn't be
told,
that much.
that's what you were told that you initially said.
That was the direction.
And Mayor Sissom and Chris and Mayor, along with that statement too, I could never support something that's going to truly deplete or even put at risk any of the CIP future.
Well, let's go on and see what, just now we were on the topic of finances.
And
Just to
and
bring
that's,
us back to
so
focus.
we believe that we can increase funding by pulling $1 million of expenditures that are currently in the $30 million of site work, pulling those into the TIF because they do directly support the parking structure. That would make, then we would make the TIF, we would suggest that the TIF be $6 million, which frees $1 million for whatever else we would want to use and within the aquatic portion or elsewhere. Anything past that, we would really need to go back and sharpen our pencils because we would likely have to come back and have to have some sort of a policy conversation about how would we reallocate our existing resources? What are we not going to do? Or which we can do. We're willing to prepare. We take direction from council if that's what council would like us to do.
Great.
You may not know this, we have to go to our expert over here, but how much is in the reserves?
You're the expert.
Because I didn't hear anything about the reserves.
Which yeah, which expert?
General fund reserve.
Well, the five-year projections for the general fund show that we're just going to be able to maintain at the policy level, which is a total of between 30 and 35% of the general fund and risk management combined. So we've already taken that into account when projecting the future transfers into the capital improvement fund. So we're just kind of holding the line. Now, we certainly hope those are going to be larger than projected, but we based on our current economic conditions, that's where we are. Now, your question about reserves for the capital improvement fund, at the end of the five-year period, as Chris said, we actually am projecting a balance. You can take a look in the recent draft. We're at $1.2 million for the general projects. So if we pull, another $1 million out of the general projects, that's cutting it pretty close. It's way too, that's outside my comfort zone for sure. Particularly because many of those costs, as Chris said, that's debt service. Those are really not optional. We cannot just cancel our debt service. We might be able to cancel the sidewalk program or street lights, but certainly that's kind of the dangerous territory in my opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so first, I would like to revisit the two of the three aquatic options that we decided to move forward with out of the meeting on the 16th last Monday. So the first revised option is a 25-yard 6-lane pool, and based on feedback from the first meeting, we created a larger, we call this a fan or pie area, which has the 0 depth area, and then the majority of this space is 3 feet 6 inches, so it's with play features, so good kind of hangout, waist deep water that you can spend time in. We have some terraced retaining wall seating over here, and then obviously some more deck space here. This option costs an additional $1.2 million, and some of the reasons why we had to install a retaining wall here. This is the big retaining wall along IKEA, and it's a pretty steep slope down to this area, so we had to add some retaining walls here. We had to do a little excavating in this area, and then the big deal is that we had to, this requires more pool equipment, so we're having to increase the building size, which has a price tag attached to it, obviously. Here in the next option, this is $1.6 million. This is a 25-yard 8-lane pool. Again, we have this larger fan area, and this one happens to fit better facing the other direction to maximize the space. And you can see a lot of the things that I talked about before. We have some additional terracing, additional retaining wall, grading, etc. in this area. Questions about those two options? These are the ones that we revisited last time. All right. And so then these are the two new layout options that council asked us to compare for Monday night. This first one has a price tag of $2.25 million. This is a 25-yard 6-lane pool. We have decreased the size of this fan area to a medium size. We added terraced seating over here. If you may recall, it's a 1-story drop from kind of ground level down to the pool area because it's on the lower level. So we're proposing using terraces, a little more developed than the last option to get us down to this area. Also, based on feedback from the last building, we're proposing installing a stairwell right here. And this, it's hard to see in this, is a kind of convenience exit located right by the parking garage. In order to fit everything, these two bodies and the new dive well on the site, we needed more room. And so instead of having the pool deck in at the same place as the building, we're proposing pushing it out further and terracing up towards the parking garage, so using that space in between the parking garage and the pool deck. Again, this does require additional filters and pumps, and what we decided to do here, instead of expand the building, is we looked at creating an exterior pool equipment building here, so we didn't have to cut into the deck space, and all of our outdoor pool equipment would be stored in this building, which is a prior turnaround lane. Any questions about this option?
That's a one-way gate.
So it'd be it'd be out only. This is only a convenience exit. It is not ADA accessible. We would not be able to have any of this terrace seating if it was anything other than a straight staircase. So people who have strollers or need any sort of assistance with mobility would need to come through the main entrance.
With that kind of design, that part of it is not ADA accessible, what are we putting at risk?
Because it is not a main entrance, we're providing an ADA route into the building. This is simply a convenience exit for people who do not want to walk back through the building. But with all the caveats that I just said, it is purely for convenience. We just simply do not have the space. It would require, because of the steep slope right here, my mouse is being funky, like a switchback throughout this site, which would take up all of your terraced seating, which was a challenge.
I think that the staircase would also allow people to get in that terracing and sit down and help them get there.
Yeah, these are kind of wide steps, so even without it, you could kind of walk up it. But yeah.
In the medium fan, what is the gradient? How much room is there in that medium fan for? Just how is that space breakout? If you think.
Sure, it's the same design. It's the same design as our as the large fan. So you have your 0 depth entry ramp right here, and then you have the 3 foot 6 inch kind of depth waist level play area. So before on the previous options, it extended past the width of the pool. This is a little more in line with the width of the pool. And then we have, of course, the dive well over here, which was one of the big changes from last time.
What is the depth change in the 25-yard pool?
And I believe it only goes to 6 feet. Is that correct? From 4 feet to 6 feet. Okay. Moving on to the next option, very similar, except we have an 8-lane pool here. All the additional amenities are the same that I discussed, but as you can see, we've just widened the pool to be 8 lanes and then appropriately sized a medium-sized fan to go with it. And
Is that the same size fan as the one?
it's a little wider because the pool got a little wider. Yeah, but the price tag for this is $2.5 million. Questions? Yes.
So if you're looking and talking about our finance, and we're looking at if we're able to find $1 million and roll it into our TIF, then we're actually looking at 1.5 that we're going to have to find somewhere, right?
Yes, and we cannot accommodate if you were to find it in the community center budget, we would need to cut another program in the community center plan. Okay, so I know there have been a lot of requests for data, and I'd like to thank Justin with his help for putting this together. So I'm going to take you through kind of the summary data points for all of these options. So over here you can see we have options 1 and 2 that were presented in the first meeting. We eliminated option 3, and so then we moved on to options. Option 3 had this splash ground, so then we moved to options 4 and 5, which are the 6th and 8 lane with the large fan, and we eliminated option 6, which was the 50-meter pool. And now we are looking this evening at options 7 and 8. And then you can see our current pool down here at the bottom. So the bather load, so all of these numbers are reported as just water space. There's no deck space included in these numbers to make sure that we had an apples to apples comparison of all of the numbers. I will note, depending on which option you choose, the deck space does change. So it's something to consider. The bigger the pool, the smaller the deck space, although we do think, based on the current number of pairs we have today, we can get pretty close to that with most of these options. So we think we can accommodate that on the outside pretty easily. But just to run through this, so this first set of data is about the outdoor pool only. You can see the outdoor pool bather load, so that's an environmental standard from the environmental code that says how many people we can safely, for health purposes, have in the water. And then we have occupancy, which is a fire code and building code. So that number is a little different. So like for our existing pool, you can see that our bather load, water only, is 811, but our occupancy is 289. So this is just for, this first set of numbers is just for the outdoor pool. This next set is for the entire pool, indoor and outdoor, and I included down here at the bottom that the indoor pool has a bather load of 385 and an occupancy of 119 people in the water. There's still additional deck space, just talking about in the water. And so just for reference, you can think about deck space for our current pool. Our deck occupancy is about 300 people. 300. Okay, so I don't know if you want me to read through this, or do we want to just use this as a starting point for questions and conversation?
Credit. When these numbers were calculated, obviously, I assume that we're talking full square footage itself of the swimming pool. There is a portion, as we've talked ad nauseum about in reference to, a portion of this pool is going to be used up for diving.
Mm-hmm.
Now, every time I've been down there in Dove, there's only 2 people that can dive at a time, or 3, and the current one, this new one's only have 2 diving boards. So, and then there's going to be something across there, and you're going to lose X amount of space. When you calculated that, did you count that diving space as part of this occupant load?
No, it is removed from the square.
It's removed from the square footage.
There's 30,000 square foot.
No,
300.
300.
Yeah, for each diving pool. Yeah, sorry. There's a calculation that you remove, and that's only for bather load. So for occupancy does not take any of that into account. So the occupant load is strictly water. If it's 6 inches deep or if it's 60 feet deep, it doesn't care if there's diving boards or not. So
But you're not using that 50 person per square, or 50 square feet per person load.
50 square, that's fire code.
In the diving area, that is excluded from your numbers that you.
No,
No, not for occupancy.
Not for occupancy.
It's still
does-
occupancy of the entire space.
But in reality, and that's what I want to
But-
make people understand, when you're looking at how many people can I put in this pool at a time by occupant load, what's that number? And as you just admitted, and we talked about, I'm only going to have 2 people in that whole area at the end of this pool for diving.
When
So
it's-
I cannot count that as part of my occupant load.
But when it's your.
I mean, I know I can from a fire code, but
Yes, and
I used to be a firefighter.
These
so I
are,
get that.
these are based on fire code, what would the posted occupancy. So really where that number is factored in is bather load, because that's where that number has to be excluded.
Which is bather load is strictly for health, not for how many people
Right,
kind of
and
out
so
there
that's.
swimming around.
Yeah, it's challenging to come up with something that answers both questions, because they're 2 very different formulas with considerations.
What we really need though is a usable load so that the pool can be used as designed, and I think that's certainly nowhere near the bather load, because the bather load is basically how many people you can get in the water without them getting sick, and that's at a time, and that's a totally different thing. It's for non-swimmer areas, which are areas less than 5 feet, that's 15 square foot per person, which if you plot that out, if you put your arms out, and you're gonna, there'll be somebody at the top of their head in every, it's just not practical.
That's what occupant loads are also.
Well, I understand that, and that's why I'm wondering what.
We would, well, let's ask the aquatics expert if there is some sort of metric that exists that we just have overlooked.
I will also add something to take into consideration is because we've created apples to apples numbers, a good frame of reference is our current pool. So however, whatever you agree on or don't agree on with the metric that we're using, if you think of our current pool and think the number is 811, here's how those numbers line up in comparison to that. Or you think of our current pool and you think 289, here's how these other pools line up in an apples to apples comparison of that. So I think there are a lot of different occupant loads that we can look at. Our goal was to help you visualize the difference in size and difference in number of people.
Justin Karen, Aquatic Design Group. We're located at 2226 Fairway Avenue in Carlsbad, California. So to answer the question, I think that in general terms, across the country, you run into sometimes it's 2 codes, sometimes it's 3 codes for occupancy. The way it's typically looked at is during plan check, of course. Former fire marshal, you'd understand this. The occupant load is very important. In reality, when the facility's open, it's that bather load that becomes the kind of governing factor. So when you look at an indoor facility, for instance, very usable space, shallow space, year-round space, you're going to get pretty close to the bather loads. On a hot summer day, you're going to get very close to the bather loads. The national standards, the international standards, both from the Model Aquatic Health Code and through APSP, which is the International Building Code, or what was adopted into that, those standards are 1 person for 20 square feet or 1 person for 15 square feet, respectively. So I think they're very consistent with your Johnson County Code. Yes, sir.
When your pool is close to the bather load, can people swim? Can people throw balls? Can people do the things that people do in a recreational setting during summer for a summer pool that most people would envision? Or are you going to be constrained to a point where you're basically just going to be in the pool and stand there?
I think a lot of that depends on the activities that are being offered. So in a lazy river, you can pack people in. In a wave pool, you can pack people in. In an open lap pool, obviously you need a little bit more space. So in the designs we have now, for instance, that fan shape, the fan would be very crowded. You'd probably have 1 person for every 15 or 20 square feet. The lap lanes, with the exception of swim practices, it's going to be much less crowded. You'd probably have 1 person for 40 or 50 square feet.
And I would also point out that using the bather load, which is a maximum number, that's not every day. I mean, that's the maximum amount of people that would be in the pool. The averages of people that are in the pool are less than half of that, based on our 10-year numbers.
What numbers are you talking about? Attendance numbers?
On our current pool, 811 being the bather load. The average for the last 10 years, the average, I mean, I know there are peak days where we might have 700 people in the pool, but those are few and far between. So I think it's important that we acknowledge that, yes, on days where it's 100 degrees and everybody wants to go to the pool, it's going to be crowded. I mean, it will, but the 90% of the rest of the days, we're designing a pool that we believe is going to manage the bather loads of the amenities that we're putting in there.
And the average occupancy of our pool, as a reminder, is about 270 people per day.
Is that everybody, or is that pre-admission?
Every total attendance, right? So the chart that you saw last time, there was an error on the date because it was free day, and staff was calculating that group of people outside of an area that I was aware of when I ran my report. So there was one mistake that I believe we did communicate, but I did want to clear that up. In regards to that one day, I now include the dive meet as a tracking number. But as an average, every day, 270 is taking into consideration every day we are open, not days that we are closed, but any day that we have staff on site and the doors are open. Now, it might be a cloudy, dreary day. I still have to count that day because I have staff in the building ready to accept patrons. So we take every day from 25 people to our biggest day of 711.
And you say that's a daily count, is it not?
It is a daily count.
So that-
And that's everybody from a pass holder, that's a season pass holder, to a punch pass person or a day pass
What are
person.
the current hours of the pool?
Monday through Thursday, noon to 8. Friday is noon to 7. Saturday is 11 to 7. And Sunday is noon to 6.
So that's all, that's the older count.
It's an all-day
You may
count.
have, or less than that, obviously, there.
And the average stay of a patron usually, there will be people outside of the norm, but the average stay is 1.5 to 2 hours.
All right, yeah, I understand, I kind of understand that. I just want to make sure that the numbers that we're using reflect the number of bodies that are in the facility, rather than some metric that's less than that.
And that is something that I have worked on diligently in my time as being here with Miriam, because when I started, staff was using a hand counter. They weren't using the software system. Now we solely use the software system that we use at the community center. So every transaction runs through that system and is counted in some way. There is no way to enter the pool without flashing your card and being scanned in, or staff physically rigging you in as a sale. So we know that any person that enters is being counted. We even make it swim lesson people sign in that they're there on swim lesson day, so I know how many people are attending for swim lessons.
Are there any other questions about daily loads, the occupancy loads?
Yes. This doesn't include the people that just come and bring their kids or grandkids and sit on the side of the pool, does it?
Unless you're under the age of 1, you pay to get in the pool.
So not everybody that comes to the pool is in the pool at the same time?
No,
Okay.
but that's never going to happen. I shouldn't say never.
Correct. That's my
When
point.
people come to the pool, there's a certain percentage of people that use the concession stand, they're in the restroom,
Correct.
they're lounging and sunning themselves, so.
And I think that's my point. Thank you.
Any other questions? Go to the report.
Okay, so the two other things that I will add just for consideration is we've talked about throughout this conversation about creating a pool design that supports our business plan. So we have taken things into consideration, like what's inside, what goes outside, and it's not an exact formula, but we do have some numbers to start with. So we know, for example, that our current business plan accommodates 12 lifeguards. Some of these designs, as you get up, require up to 4 additional lifeguards for us. And so the plans that we have proposed in the options 1 and 2 had the correct number of lifeguards that aligned with our business plan. And we looked at square foot, what's inside, what's outside of amenities. But I do just want to say the more, we do have capital construction costs to consider. We're not able to fully outline the impact on operations, but you can imagine as we're adding more filters and pumps, increasing the water, there will be additional chemicals, electricity, et cetera, that we'll need to take into consideration. And all of those increase the subsidy that is coming out of the city's budget to operate this every year. It's not something I can provide a lot of data for right now, but I just want to say that is something to keep in mind. The bigger the pool, the bigger the subsidy will be.
Regarding your comment about lifeguards, I would assume that it takes more lifeguards if the water spaces are divided up per unit of water. So if you actually have some larger bodies of water, the lifeguard cost per square foot is potentially it's not a direct increase.
It's not, we
Depending
have
on
to
your
look
design.
at view, what they can see, how much space, like how wide the pool is, changes the number of lifeguards and different spaces. That's why it's great to have, there you go, Justin and his team on board to help us identify as part of this design where we think we need lifeguards.
If I can just touch on lifeguards real quick. I was talking with Anna earlier, our your pool, your pool, currently this is the first year they've been fully staffed with lifeguards. Nationwide, there's a growing trend. The kids, younger adults, just don't want to be lifeguards anymore. It's very hard to find lifeguards. We have facilities all over the country that just cannot maintain being open. So the jump from 12 to 16 may not sound like that much, but I can foresee in your future being unable to have all the pools open because you don't have enough lifeguards to service all those bodies of water at once.
Has there been any studies done regarding the rate of pay versus the availability of lifeguards? Because I know that right now there's competitive pressure in terms of a lot of other jobs that pay minimum.
Yes, sir. When you look at I think the best example of that would be to go to a place like Seattle, where the minimum wage is $16 an hour, $18 an hour. You can get that bagging groceries. Why would you get that working? I'm not to say you don't work, bagging groceries, but you're standing out, sitting on a lifeguard chair in the sun, dealing with just the rigors of that job. And so that's certainly part of it. I think another part is the society changes, the demographic shifts, and how people choose to use their time. Being a lifeguard means you have to be plugged in to what's going on. You can't be looking at your phone, you can't be interacting with people as most younger people do. One of the exciting trends, though, with regards to lifeguard is getting active adults, active seniors that can service those roles and fill those gaps, and I think a lot of communities are getting creative with that.
What are we paying currently for starting lifeguard?
Anywhere from $10 to $12 an hour,
Nothing less than that.
which is in range with our neighbors, and we've had to actually take a look at that this year because those amounts keep going up as we all continue to compete with each other.
When you were developing your pro forma, is it your anticipation that with this new pool, that will that increase the number of people in the aquatics, or stay the same, or decrease?
The pro forma is based off our current aquatics count, daily attendance counts. So our current stats were used to create the pro forma. So we, in that consideration, look at when we talked about right-sizing the pool, understanding that the actual pool size might shrink a little, so we wanted to make sure we were very conservative with those estimates. So if there are more people who come to the pool, that does help our pro forma amount, but it's hard to say if you increase it this much, then it's going to increase it. And we'd have to really go back and redo the business plan if you want to get into that in great detail.
I've heard from a number of constituents that say that they're not going to use our pool anymore if we put in what we have now. So that number, I think, is going to decrease. So that's going to mess with your pro forma.
Yeah.
I spent some time down at the pool, and I surveyed patrons of the pool, which is something we haven't done in the process, to my knowledge, other than the few that might have been randomly included in the Merriam survey that we talked about that went out in 2016. And again, looking at the first option, which was essentially a 3,600 square foot pool with a dive well in it, every single one of them, I talked to at least 20 different people, and many of them are, all of them, I don't want to say all really didn't ask that question, but most of them volunteered that they are, pass holders, have been for years, including family pass holders, and they said that if we build that design, they will not be coming back. So I think we also have an economic risk in the pro forma that we need to consider if we do not provide an adequate outdoor.
I just want to add, but we'll have an indoor pool that will be open 9.5 months. So just interviewing our very, very important outdoor swimmers does not include that. So you can't out of hand say our attendance and our pro forma is not going to go away.
I will also add that we did survey pool patrons, so in addition to the ETC survey, if you recall, Chris talked about last time the additional survey that we opened up for people who did not receive, and the survey that went out in the mail, and if you look at the results, a number of the people who participated or opted in to participate with that were pool patrons.
Again, talking about this same issue a little bit further, I think that during the school year, kids aren't going to be available to come to an indoor facility as much. So you're really talking about a couple, maybe on the weekends, whereas in the summer, they can come 7 days a week. And so if you have a summer experience that is not adequate and driving them to other places, what's the spillover effect going to be potentially to joining the overall community center? I don't know that we understand that fully.
Well, so when we look at the audiences for our indoor pool, if you look at the mix of amenities, there is a lot of space that can be used by children. There's some dedicated space, and there's some space that we can jointly utilize if another program isn't going on. But we are thinking about during the daytime, that's when you have your senior citizen group that wants to come in and do fitness walking in the lazy river. We've talked about having some additional water therapies during kind of those non-peak times, really to make sure that we're fully utilizing the inside of the pool. We probably, I mean, there's a good probability not all spaces on the indoor pool will be open all day long. Maybe it's only flat plane is open during certain times, or in the middle of the day we don't have both sides fully operational. A lot of community centers look at how do we match our hours with the demand so we don't have to be fully staffed at all times. I will say the fully staffed count for lifeguards at our indoor pool is 6. So there are times when we can get by with fewer of those, depending on what features we have open. Do you have something like that?
If I can just add to a couple of points that have been brought up. I think that not to discount at all, I was a coach swimmer, so if you ask me, I want an all defense meter pool. The reality is that doesn't fit our site, right, or our budget. But to put that in context, when you're talking to your current patrons, they know what they currently have. They've never experienced some other things. And there's portions of your community who won't use your existing center because of how it's laid out. Nationwide trends, again, I'm a big trends person, demographics. Parents don't want their kids in the sun. Your indoor swim lessons is going to skyrocket. The #1 revenue source for aquatics is swim lessons. #2 revenue source for aquatics, therapy classes. Again, indoor pool caters to that crowd. I'm not trying to discount the fact that we need to satisfy our whole community. I'm just trying to maybe help everyone understand that there are portions of your community that won't use your current pool for whatever reason, and they'll have the opportunity to do that in this new pool, as it's envisioned.
And I grant that. There is a summer pool experience that many people have expected and has been present in Marion, and has been actually something that we have been proud of as a community for a long time. And I understand the right side issue, but I also spoke with people who told me that in the summer, I want to be outside. I will use an indoor pool in the rest of the year, but I will be outside because I want the fresh air and I want the sun. I do not want, no matter how good the ventilation system we have in indoor aquatics, it still smells like chlorine. And so you're running the risk of people during the summer and families. I believe our pool has a lot of families. That's what we have. And the current design, I recognize we can't deal with it, can't fix that. But we currently have a children's area that's upraised so that parents can have their little kids in the children's area and their older kids in the main pool playing around, and they love it. They come. People come from Missouri to our pool. And so we will lose, likely, a number of those people. And that may be okay with everybody, but we need to understand that's the decision we're making. And that's all I'm trying to say.
How many people do we lose in January at our pool right now?
270 a day.
Okay. We're also ignoring the winter pool experience. We don't have that yet. We don't have anything to compare that to. And part of our whole initiative to get a community center and co-locating a pool outdoors and indoors was to have this year-round experience in our pool. And it's going to help we're stuck on outdoor. We've got to look at the whole thing. And we've got to experience the whole year, not just outdoor for 2.5 months. We've got 12 months out of the year, and we need to be looking at those other periods of time.
I'm not disagreeing with you, I'm just saying that,
You seem to be hung up on the outdoor.
well,
For 2.5 months, we have 12 months out of the year that we need to look at.
I'm asking sort of how the pro forma economics, what the assumptions were, where they, are we assuming that we're gonna have those same people? We're not gonna necessarily have the same people, but are we gonna have different people that more than make up for it, and is that what we wanna do? That's really what the question boils down to, or do we make a bigger
And, you know,
outdoor?
what we have to consider too, you're kind of a little bit late in the process, but that is where that's where the money is made up, is the year-round revenue that we get. And believe me, I've talked to a lot of people who are going to be extremely happy when this thing opens up, because it's going to give them a place to come and do therapy, water therapy, water aerobics. These aren't kids, by the way, they're on the other end of the spectrum. These are people that don't use our pool now. So these are all new Marion residents. We are spending a lot of time, which is all important, to talk about the constituency here that may be in the hundreds, in the low hundreds. And we aren't thinking about the 11,000 people that live here that are going to use the community center and the indoor pool and the outdoor pool. And yes, it's going to be different. And some people aren't going to like it. We understand that. But there's going to be some people that do like it. And I don't think that we're inventing the wheel here, reinventing the wheel. We get consultants that tell us what has happened in other communities that have done this. So it's not like it's never happened before. And there's been successes that are measurable, and they're successes you can count on. This is why we moved to the position where we're at today. Because yes, we understand this is going to be different, and there are people out there in this audience that are not going to be happy. They're not going to be happy with any pool that we build unless it looks exactly like the one that's down there now. And we told them all along that's not going to happen.
I'd like to add one comment, and it's kind of on the periphery here. But our current locker room facilities are dismal. They're pathetic. They're embarrassing. Yes, that is on the periphery here of indoor and outdoor pool, but that is going to be a great enhancement in my mind. Much, much better locker room facilities.
Site plan.
Site plan. So this is a reminder of where we stand in the process. Chris covered during our last meeting that where we are is needing to put together this is not our site, a picture that looks like this from the bird's eye view, and it's time for us to start setting where the building goes. And in order to keep us on schedule, we have to have that submitted to the Community Development Department by August 10th for our September 5th Planning Commission in order to move forward. Now, if we don't hit this August 10th deadline, which involves making a decision tonight about what amenities we need to include in the pool, even if we're going to, make a few little minor adjustments, but big picture, the outdoor pool, we need to make those decisions tonight, because if we don't, we'll miss this deadline, and we will not be opening in summer 2020. So we'll be missing 2 pool seasons.
Which is also one of the things that Public was assured, along with the amount we were going to spend and the basic amenities, even if they don't end up outdoors, that we provide. And again, that was a valid issue to the public. They voted on it, and now it's our turn to make it happen.
So that is the end of that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to answer any other questions, or I can come back up after public comments.
See what the public has to say. Okay, I've got a list here of 10. I know there's more than 10 of you out there, but let's start here.
Here's a question, procedural question. given that it's 9 o'clock at night and you said we have more than 10 people probably who want to speak to this issue, instead of the 5-minute limit, could we make it 4 minutes in all fairness to give everybody a chance to speak?
I'll take it, let's see how we go with 5, because I find that a lot of people want to speak for 2 minutes.